Some people walk into a room and feel nothing at all. The air is neutral. The faces are ordinary. Life continues as expected. And then there are others. They step inside, and something shifts. Not in the room, but in them. Their chest tightens for no clear reason. Their spirit grows quiet. Their attention sharpens. Nothing looks wrong. Nothing sounds wrong. Yet something feels off. Off. There's no voice from heaven, no vision, no dramatic warning sign. Just a quiet, unsettling knowing, a sense that the smile in front of them is wearing a mask, that the words being spoken don't fully match the heart behind them, that what's happening on the surface is not the whole story. And almost every time, they talk themselves out of it. I'm overthinking. I'm being judgmental. I do not want to seem dramatic, so they ignore it. But what if that quiet knowing wasn't imagination? What if it wasn't fear? What if it was not paranoia at all? What if it was something ancient? Something scripture speaks of in hushed but powerful terms. Something history records again and again. Something that still operates today, silently, through ordinary people. Tonight, we are not talking about superstition. Not about suspicion. Not about assuming the worst. We are talking about discernment, a gift that does not shout, a gift that does not draw attention to itself, a gift that often hides behind humility, sensitivity, and silence. The Bible calls it the ability to perceive what lies beneath, to distinguish truth from imitation, light from disguise, spirit from performance. It has guided prophets, protected kings, exposed deception, and at times, save lives. And here's the unsettling part. Those who carry this gift rarely realize it at first. They feel different, more sensitive, more affected by atmospheres, more aware of things others overlook. They sense danger before it arrives. They notice inconsistency before it's visible. They feel drained around certain people without knowing why. And because the world prizes loud confidence over quiet perception, they often doubt themselves. But what if that whisper you've been ignoring isn't weakness but wisdom? What if the very thing you were told makes you too much is actually a divine sensitivity meant to protect, guide, and reveal? Tonight, we're uncovering the gift that whispers instead of roars. The gift that sees without accusing. The gift that knows without needing proof. This is the story of discernment, and by the end of this, you may realize something unsettling, beautiful, and life-changing. You've been carrying it all along. The first sign is this. You don't just hear words, you listen beneath them. You may not have had language for it when you were younger, but you felt it early on. A conversation would sound perfectly fine to everyone else. The tone polite, the smile convincing, the words carefully chosen. And yet, something in you would tighten. Not alarm, not suspicion. Just a subtle inner pause. A quiet resistance that didn't accuse but refused to fully agree. They could say the right things, use the right phrases, even pray the right prayers. Still, your spirit wouldn't settle. You didn't feel anger toward them. You didn't assume the worst. You just couldn't fully trust what you were hearing. Modern psychology has a name for this. Researchers call it thin-slicing the brain's ability to process tiny details faster than conscious thought. Micro-expressions, tone shifts, inconsistencies the mind picks up before logic catches up. But scripture points to something far deeper. It speaks of a capacity not just to read behavior, but to test spirits, to sense when words and inner reality don't align, when truth is being spoken with lips, but not carried in the heart. This is why people with discernment often feel conflicted after conversations. They replay them not out of anxiety, but out of quiet confusion. Why didn't that sit right? Why do I feel uneasy when nothing was said wrong? And when they voice it, they're usually dismissed. You're reading too much into it. You're being sensitive. You're overthinking. So they learn to doubt themselves. They tell themselves to be more agreeable, more trusting, more silent. But then time passes, and slowly, almost reluctantly, the truth surfaces. The story changes. The character cracks. The intentions reveal themselves. And suddenly, everyone else is shocked. Everyone else asks, "How did we miss this?" And you're left sitting with a familiar, unsettling thought. I knew, not because I was suspicious, not because I was cynical, but because something in me recognized the mismatch before there was evidence. This sign of discernment rarely announces itself as certainty. It shows up as a pause, a hesitation, a knowing you can't yet explain. And here is what most people didn't realize. This ability isn't meant to make you proud. It's meant to make you careful, because later, much later, you'll understand why that inner resistance mattered and what it was quietly trying to protect you from. And that leads us to the next sign, one that reveals why discernment often feels more like a burden before it feels like a gift. The second sign is harder to talk about, not because it's rare, but because it's often misunderstood. You feel emotions that don't seem to belong to you. You can wake up fine, clear-headed, steady, and then, without warning, something shifts. A sudden heaviness settles in your chest, a sadness you can't trace back to any thought, an unease that arrives without explanation. Nothing happened. No bad news, no triggering memory. Yet the weight is real. At first, you assume it must be yours. Maybe you're tired, maybe you're overwhelmed, maybe you're just too sensitive. But later, sometimes much later, you realize the truth. The feeling didn't come from within you. It came from the room, from the tension no one spoke about, from the grief someone carried in silence, from an unresolved conflict hanging invisibly in the air. You didn't create the emotion. You picked it up. Biblical scholars have long noted that discernment often overlaps with spiritual sensitivity, an awareness that goes beyond logic or empathy. This is not emotional weakness. It is emotional perception. The ability to sense what is present but unspoken, to feel what others have buried, hidden, or learned to ignore. Jesus himself moved this way. He wept where others felt nothing. He paused where others rushed past. He sensed sorrow before anyone named it. He stood still in moments that felt normal to everyone else, because he felt the weight beneath them. And if you carry this gift, you've probably learned a difficult habit. You stop and ask yourself, quietly, is this mine? Because so often, it isn't. You've absorbed atmospheres, carried emotions that weren't yours to hold, mistaken spiritual awareness for personal sadness. This is why discernment can feel exhausting before it feels meaningful. Why crowded rooms drain you. Why certain conversations leave you heavy long after they end. But here, as the powerful people tell you, this sensitivity is not meant to consume you. It's meant to inform you. It teaches you when to pray, when to step back, when to recognize pain without taking ownership of it. And if you don't learn to separate what's yours from what isn't, this gift will feel like a burden instead of a calling. Because the third sign reveals something even more unsettling, why discernment often isolates you, and why that isolation may be intentional. The third sign is this: you don't just see moments, you see patterns. While others focus on what's happening right now, your attention drifts backward and forward. You notice repetition, rhythm. The quiet shape a story is taking long before it reaches its climax. This isn't limited to people, though. You see it there clearly. You recognize when someone keeps ending up in the same kind of heartbreak, just with a different face attached, a different name, a different excuse. You hear familiar language in new conversations. You sense familiar tension in new situations. And something in you thinks, I've seen this before. Not exactly this, but the shape of it. You notice cycles, warnings repeating themselves in softer forms at first. Small compromises, overlooked red flags, harmless choices that resemble older disasters. You see history echoing, and what unsettles you most is that others don't seem to notice. They see coincidence. You see momentum. Scripture speaks to this kind of perception in subtle ways. Discernment in the Bible was never only about labeling things as good or evil. It was about timing, about recognizing when something looked promising, but wasn't ready, when it sounded right, but wasn't aligned, when an open door was an invitation, but a test. This is why discernment so often brings hesitation where others feel excitement, why you pause while others rush ahead. Why you ask questions that make people uncomfortable. You're not trying to ruin the moment. You're sensing where the story is headed. And this is where loneliness enters, because being early to the truth rarely feels like wisdom. It feels like isolation. You see the ending before the middle is finished unfolding. You feel the warning before the damage is visible. And when you try to explain it, you struggle because how do you prove a pattern that hasn't fully formed yet? So you stay quiet, or you speak and get dismissed. Or worse, you're labeled negative, fearful, or But time has a way of vindicating discernment. Eventually, the cycle completes. The pattern becomes obvious. The warning reveals why it mattered, and others finally say, I didn't see that coming. But you did, and the weight of that knowing is heavy, because discernment isn't about being right. It's about seeing early enough to choose differently. The question is, what do you do when you recognize a pattern, but no one else is ready to see it? Because the next sign reveals something even deeper. Why discernment doesn't just show you what will happen, but forces you to decide what you're willing to walk away from before it does. The fourth sign is deeply uncomfortable. Not because it's dramatic, but because it quietly puts you at odds with the crowd. You are not easily impressed by charisma. You've seen it too many times. The confidence that fills a room, the charm that disarms questions, the polished words, the applause that comes on cue. Everyone else is moved, inspired, certain they're witnessing something special. And yet, something in you stays unmoved. Not cynical, not cold, just unconvinced. There's a hollow note beneath the performance you can't ignore. You've learned often, the hard way that presence is not the same as substance. That volume is not authority. That confidence can be rehearsed. Discernment has trained your attention to look past the surface, past the delivery, past the image. It listens for consistency instead of excitement. It watches behavior when no one is applauding. It waits to see what remains when the spotlight moves on. This is why discernment is uncomfortable, because it strips away the illusion everyone else is enjoying. In Scripture, those with discernment were rarely celebrated in their own time. Prophets weren't admired for their tone. They were tolerated at best, rejected more often. Not because they were wrong, but because they spoke truth without decoration. They saw through kings, crowds, and ceremonies, and people don't like having their illusions disturbed. Even modern leadership experts admit this quietly. Charisma and integrity are not the same thing. One can draw followers, the other can withstand time, and discernment gives you the ability to tell the difference, even when the crowd cannot. This is why you sometimes feel out of place in moments everyone else celebrates. Why you hesitate while others cheer. Why you're slow to idolize people the world quickly elevates. It's not that you don't appreciate excellence, it's that you're watching for alignment. And that often makes you feel alone. Because when the crowd is intoxicated by image, discernment feels like dissent. But here's the unsettling truth. Charisma fades, performance collapses, applause moves on. And when it does, discernment is usually the only thing still standing. The question is, what happens when the hollow thing everyone celebrated finally reveals itself? Because the next sign explains why people with discernment are often misunderstood, and why that misunderstanding may be part of the cost of seeing clearly. The fourth sign is deeply uncomfortable, not because it's dramatic, but because it quietly puts you at odds with the crowd. You are not easily impressed by charisma. You've seen it too many times. The confidence that fills a room, the charm that disarms questions, the polished words, the applause that comes on cue. Everyone else is moved, inspired, certain they're witnessing something special. And yet, something in you stays unmoved, not cynical, not cold, just unconvinced. There's a hollow note beneath the performance you can't ignore. You've learned often, the hard way that presence is not the same as substance. That volume is not authority. That confidence can be rehearsed. Discernment has trained your attention to look past the surface, past the delivery, past the image. It listens for consistency instead of excitement. It watches behavior when no one is applauding. It waits to see what remains when the spotlight moves on. This is why discernment is uncomfortable, because it strips away the illusion everyone else is enjoying. In Scripture, those with discernment were rarely celebrated in their own time. Prophets weren't admired for their tone, they were tolerated at best, rejected more often, not because they were wrong, but because they spoke truth without decoration. They saw through kings, crowds, and ceremonies, and people don't like having their illusions disturbed. Even modern leadership experts admit this quietly. Charisma and integrity are not the same thing. One can draw followers, the other can withstand time. And discernment gives you the ability to tell the difference, even when the crowd cannot. This is why you sometimes feel out of place in moments everyone else celebrates, why you hesitate while others cheer, why you're slow to idolize people the world quickly elevates. It's not that you don't appreciate excellence, it's that you're watching for alignment. And that often makes you feel alone, because when the crowd is intoxicated by image, discernment feels like dissent. But here's the unsettling truth. Charisma fades, performance collapses, applause moves on, and when it does, discernment is usually the only thing still standing. The question is, what happens when the hollow thing everyone celebrated finally reveals itself? Because the next sign explains why people with discernment are often misunderstood, and why that misunderstanding may be part of the cost of seeing clearly. The fifth sign is subtle but unmistakably powerful. It doesn't arrive as a warning. It doesn't announce itself. It simply notices. Silence speaks loudly to you. While others focus on what's being said, your attention drifts to what isn't. The sentence that stops halfway. The question that's carefully avoided. The moment a conversation suddenly shifts direction just a little too quickly. You feel it when the room goes quiet for the wrong reason. When laughter fills space that should have held truth. When someone speaks confidently, but leaves something important untouched. You notice patterns of absence. Topics no one wants to bring up. Names that never get mentioned. Stories that are told without their most important chapter. In investigative journalism, silence is rarely empty. It's often the loudest clue in the room. What people refuse to talk about usually points to where the truth is buried. What's missing often matters more than what's present. Scripture echoes this in a deeper way. God is not always found in noise, not always in spectacle, not always in explanation. Sometimes he speaks in stillness, in pauses, in quiet nudges that require attention rather than excitement. Those with discernment learn to listen differently. They don't rush to fill the silence. They sit with it. They let it breathe. They let it reveal itself. Because absence can communicate intent. Avoidance can expose fear. And omission can point directly to what someone is protecting. This is why you sometimes feel unsettled after conversations that seemed fine. Why everything sounded right but something felt incomplete. It wasn't what was said that stayed with you. It was what never came up. And here's what makes this gift uncomfortable. Once you learn to hear silence, you can't unhear it. You begin to recognize when peace is real and when it's manufactured. When agreement is genuine and when it's just the absence of conflict. You realize that truth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in the gaps. And that leads to a difficult realization. If silence is speaking, what is it trying to protect you from? Because the next sign reveals why discernment doesn't just listen, it warns, and why ignoring what's missing can cost far more than confronting what's present. The sixth sign can feel like a burden, not because it hardens you, but because it makes you careful. You are slow to trust, but when you do, your loyalty runs deep. This isn't distance, it isn't indifference, and it certainly isn't coldness. It's awareness. You've seen often up close what happens when trust is handed out too quickly. You've watched sincerity be taken advantage of, promises used as leverage, vulnerability turned into currency, so you move differently. You observe before you open. You listen before you commit. You let time reveal what words cannot. You don't give your heart impulsively, but when you do, it is intentional, measured, covenantal. Biblically, discernment was never designed to isolate individuals. It was meant to protect community, to guard relationships from corruption, to preserve what was holy from being handled carelessly. Yet those who carry this gift are often misunderstood. You're labeled guarded, reserved, distant. People assume you're withholding something, But what they don't see is that you are protecting something. You understand that trust is not fragile, it's sacred. Once broken, it changes the shape of everything that follows, and you refuse to treat it casually. This is why discernment can feel heavy. You want connection, but you also see consequences. You desire closeness, but you understand cost. So you choose slowly, and that slowness can look like hesitation to those who don't see what you see. But here's the quiet truth. When you finally give your trust, you give it fully. You stand. You stay. You intercede. You remain when others leave. Your loyalty isn't loud, it's lasting. And that makes you rare. The question is, what happens when someone finally earns that trust? And what happens when discernment tells you they haven't? Because the final sign reveals why this gift doesn't just guard your heart. It prepares you for moments when discernment must choose between attachment and obedience. And finally, the seventh sign, the one most people never see, because it doesn't feel like a gift at all. It feels like a responsibility you never asked for. When you sense danger, deception, or misalignment, something inside you refuses to stay quiet. You try to ignore it. You tell yourself it's not your place. You hope someone else will speak. But silence begins to weigh heavier than words, even when saying something costs you comfort, even when it risks misunderstanding, even when it places you on the outside of the group. You don't speak because you enjoy confrontation. You speak because not speaking feels like betrayal of truth, of conscience, of something sacred placed within you. The prophet Jeremiah described it perfectly. He said the truth burned like a fire, shut up in his bones. Held in long enough, it became unbearable. You may call this conscience, but it goes deeper than moral instinct. It's not just about right and wrong. It's about alignment, about sensing when a path leads somewhere destructive even if it looks peaceful at first. This is why discernment can feel costly. You're often forced to choose between harmony and honesty, between being liked and being faithful, between comfort now and consequences later. And many times, the cost is real. You lose favor. You lose access. You lose relationships that were built on unspoken agreement rather than truth. Yet something in you knows, if you stayed silent, you would lose yourself. This is the part of discernment few talk about. It doesn't just reveal things to you. It asks something of you. Courage and sacrifice obedience without applause. And here is the unsettling realization. Those who carry discernment are rarely called to speak at convenient times. They're called at critical ones. Moments where a warning can still change an outcome. Moments where truth, spoken early enough, can spare pain later. So the question becomes unavoidable. What do you do when you see clearly? But speaking will cost you everything you dare or keep, because this is where discernment reaches its final test. Not in what you can perceive, but in what you're willing to obey when the moment arrives. Have you ever made a choice you later regretted? A decision that seemed so right at the moment, but looking back, you think, what was I even thinking? We've all been there. It's part of the human experience. But what if I told you there's a skill, an inner compass, that you can develop to navigate these moments with more clarity and confidence? This skill is called discernment, and as we have mentioned above, the signs to show that you possess the gift of discernment. We're going to dive deep into what it truly is, and why it's not just a nice to have, but a crucial responsibility we all share. So, what is discernment? It's often confused with just being judgmental or critical, but that's not it at all. Discernment isn't about pointing fingers or labeling things as simply good or bad. It's a much more refined and thoughtful process. Think of it as a form of spiritual and mental wisdom. It's the ability to see beyond the surface, to understand the subtle differences between what's true and what is almost true, what's helpful and what's merely distracting. It's about perception, insight, and a deep sense of understanding. Imagine you're walking through a dense forest. There are many paths. Some look easy and inviting, lined with beautiful flowers. Others are narrow, rocky, and less traveled. A superficial glance might lead you to the easy path, but discernment is like having a map and a compass. It helps you see that the beautiful path might lead to a dead end, while the more challenging one is the only route that leads you out of the forest and to your destination. Discernment is that inner tool that helps you read the map of life. It's not about judging the paths, but about understanding where they lead. Let's break it down further. Discernment involves a few key elements. First, it requires quiet. In our noisy, hyper-connected world, finding a moment of silence can feel like a luxury. But you can't hear your own inner voice if you're constantly bombarded with external noise. This means intentionally carving out time to be still, to reflect, and to listen. It's in these moments of quiet that your intuition can speak up, that the subtle truths can emerge from the background chatter. Second, discernment requires knowledge and experience. It's not just about a gut feeling, although intuition plays a huge part. It's about an informed gut feeling. The more you learn, the more you read, the more you expose yourself to different ideas and perspectives, the more data your mind has to work with. Your past experiences, both your successes and your failures, are invaluable lessons. They build a library of reference points in your mind. When you face a new situation, your brain can pull from this library to help you make a more discerning choice. So, never see your mistakes as just failures. See them as tuition fees for the school of life. Third, and this is so important, discernment requires humility. You have to be willing to admit that you don't have all the answers. You have to be open to the possibility that your first impression might be wrong. A discerning person isn't arrogant. They are curious. They ask questions. They seek counsel from wise people they trust. They understand that their own perspective is limited, and they actively try to see the bigger picture. Pride clouds judgment, while humility clears the way for wisdom. Now, let's talk about why this is a responsibility. In a world overflowing with information, misinformation, and competing agendas, the ability to discern is not just for our own personal benefit. It has a ripple effect. Every choice we make, every belief we adopt, every word we speak, influences the world around us. Think about the content you consume online, the articles you share, the videos you like, the comments you leave. Without discernment, we can easily become unwitting pawns in spreading false narratives or harmful ideologies. We might share a headline that triggers an emotional reaction without stopping to check the source, read the full article, or consider the consequences. A discerning person pauses. They ask, is this true? Is this helpful? Is this kind? Is sharing this going to contribute positively to the conversation, or is it just adding to the noise and division? Our responsibility for discernment extends into our relationships as well. It's about choosing our friends wisely, people who uplift us and challenge us to be better. It's about how we interact with our family and colleagues. Do we react impulsively in an argument? Or do we use discernment to understand the other person's perspective and respond with grace and wisdom? Discernment in relationships builds trust and fosters deep, meaningful connections. It helps us navigate conflict, not as a battle to be won, but as an opportunity for mutual understanding and growth. This responsibility also applies to the big decisions in our lives, our career paths, our financial choices, our personal values. These aren't just random events. They are opportunities to exercise discernment. Choosing a career isn't just about the salary. It's about aligning your work with your purpose and values. Managing your finances isn't just about spending and saving. It's about being a good steward of your resources. Living by a set of values isn't about rigid rules. It's about consistently choosing actions that reflect the person you want to be. So, how can we actively cultivate this skill? Let's get practical. First, as we mentioned, practice solitude and silence. Start with just 5 minutes a day. No phone, no music, no distractions. Just sit with your own thoughts. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but stick with it. This is where you begin to tune into your inner frequency. Second, be a mindful consumer of information. Before you believe it, before you share it, vet it. Who is saying this? What is their motive? Is there evidence to support it? Read from diverse sources, especially those that challenge your own views. This builds mental flexibility and protects you from living in an echo chamber. Third, journal. Writing down your thoughts, your feelings, your dilemmas is a powerful tool for clarity. When you write, you're forced to organize your thoughts. You can look at a problem from different angles. You can often write your way to a solution you couldn't see before. Reviewing old journal entries can also reveal patterns in your thinking and decision-making, which is incredibly valuable feedback. Fourth, seek wise counsel. Identify a few people in your life whose judgment you respect. They could be mentors, older family members, or trusted friends. When you're facing a tough decision, talk it through with them. You don't have to take their advice, but their perspective can illuminate blind spots. You might have to remember, a wise person learns from their own mistakes, but a genius learns from the mistakes of others. And finally, practice self-compassion. Developing discernment is a lifelong journey, not a destination. You will still make mistakes. You will have moments of poor judgment. Tatese? Okay. The key is not to beat yourself up, but to learn the lesson. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I choose differently next time? Every stumble is an opportunity to strengthen your discernment muscles for the future. Discernment isn't a mystical gift bestowed upon a select few. It is a practical, learnable skill that is essential for navigating the complexities of modern life. It's about slowing down in a world that's constantly telling you to speed up. It's about choosing depth over superficiality. It is the quiet power that allows you to distinguish between the echo and the voice, the shadow and the substance. By embracing discernment as a personal responsibility, we not only improve the quality of our own lives, but we also contribute to a wiser, more thoughtful, and more compassionate world. We become lighthouses of clarity in a sea of confusion. So, let's commit to this practice. Let's commit to listening more than we speak, to reflecting more than we react, and to seeking wisdom in all that we do. The journey is worth it, and the impact is immeasurable. Thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. If this resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content on personal growth and conscious living. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. How do you practice discernment in your own life? Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.